Ever been in a group and things just go completely sideways
Yeah.
and you just can't figure out why? Like everyone's saying all the right things, but something feels off.
It is fascinating how
Yeah.
often we try to solve group problems without looking at what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah.
And our source material today, these excerpts from group dynamics and mediation and facilitation, really get into all that.
I have to say, just reading these excerpts has already made me rethink a lot of my past experiences.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
To set the stage, these sources define mediation and facilitation as helping people find agreements.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's about creating a structure to help people communicate and collaborate. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
The source argues that any complex negotiation is actually its own kind of group, with all the same dynamics at play.
So it's not just about the official reason everyone's gathered, but also all the unspoken stuff happening underneath. Like when you go to a family dinner,
Yeah.
everyone's there to celebrate grandma, but then you can just feel the tension between certain cousins.
Yeah, a perfect analogy.
Right.
And that brings us to the work of Wilfried Bion.
Okay.
He was a pioneer in group psychology who talked about the two levels of interaction in groups,
Okay.
the work group and the basic assumption group.
So the work group sounds pretty straightforward, like the official agenda,
Yeah.
right? The task at hand.
Exactly.
All right.
It's the group operating at a conscious, rational level.
Okay.
But then there's the basic assumption group.
All right.
And this is where things get a little irrational.
Oh.
It's driven by primitive emotions and unconscious needs and anxieties that can sometimes conflict with the goals of the work group.
So back to our family dinner analogy. The work group is everyone politely asking grandma about her trip.
Right.
But the basic assumption group is like the simmering resentment over who got the bigger slice of cake last Christmas.
Precisely. And sometimes those undercurrents completely derail the official reason for getting together.
Yeah.
Imagine a work team that says that they're all about collaboration, but then anxieties about job security lead to competition and backstabbing.
Wow. So it's like the group's operating on two levels at once.
Yeah,
And the unofficial level can be way more powerful than anyone realizes.
definitely.
Now, Bion didn't stop there. He actually identified 3 basic assumptions or modes that these groups tend to fall into.
Yeah,
Have you ever been in a meeting and something just felt off, but you couldn't quite place it?
many times.
Well, this might explain why.
Yeah, he called them basic assumptions because they're these underlying unconscious patterns
That's
that
right.
drive how the group behaves.
Interesting.
And they're surprisingly common.
Okay.
The first one is attack flight.
Attack flight. That sounds kind of intense.
It can be.
Okay.
This is when fear and anxiety are just dominating the group. They're always on the lookout for an enemy, whether it's a rival company, a dissenting voice within the group, or even just an abstract threat.
So it's like a circle the wagons mentality,
Exactly.
but with a lot of adrenaline pumping.
Exactly. And the leader in this type of group often needs to embody that same fear and aggression to maintain their authority.
Interesting.
If you're ever in a meeting where everyone's pointing fingers and blaming each other or obsessing over some external competitor, you might be witnessing attack flight.
To be fair, though,
Yep.
a little healthy competition can be motivating.
Of course.
But if it tips over into paranoia and infighting, then things get messy.
For sure.
So what's the next basic assumption? Let's go with something a little less adrenaline-fueled.
All right, let's shift gears to coupling.
Okay,
This one's less about fear and more about hope,
Okay.
but it can still have its pitfalls.
Coupling sounds a little more romantic than attack flight.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
It's characterized by this intense hope and expectation
Right.
that's focused on a specific pairing within the group. Now, it's not necessarily romantic.
Oh,
It's
man.
more like this belief that these two individuals hold the key to saving the group or
Wow.
achieving the group's goals.
So it's like putting all your eggs in one basket and hoping this dynamic duo will come through.
Exactly.
I've seen that happen in work teams where everybody defers to these 2 stars.
Right.
And their opinions, even if other people have valuable insights.
What's interesting is that in coupling, these groups often limit communication with anyone outside that chosen pair.
It's like they create their own little bubble and they shut out any outside perspectives.
Exactly. And that can become a problem because it can lead to groupthink and it can really stifle creativity.
Yeah.
So while a strong partnership can be beneficial,
Right.
it's important to make sure everyone feels included and valued.
For sure.
If you find yourself in this situation, you could try to encourage broad broader participation.
Okay.
You could even just say something like, hey, I'd love to hear what others think about this.
That's a great tip because it's so easy to get swept up in that dynamic.
Yeah.
But you have to remember that everyone has something to contribute.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got attack flight, driven by fear, and coupling, fueled by hope in a specific pairing. What's the third one?
The third one is dependency.
Dependency.
And as the name suggests,
Okay.
this is when the group acts in a very childlike manner.
Okay.
They're always looking for a strong, protective leader to guide them and to make decisions for them.
Oh, but the classic tell us what to do
Yeah.
mentality.
Exactly.
I've definitely been in those situations where everyone seems to be waiting for someone else to take charge.
Yeah,
But doesn't that put a lot of pressure on the leader?
absolutely it does.
Okay.
A strong leader can be reassuring, but dependency can lead to unrealistic expectations and a lack of accountability.
Right.
So if the leader doesn't live up to those expectations, the group can quickly turn on them.
Like the old saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown.
Exactly.
But on the flip side, isn't some dependency normal in a group setting?
Oh, for sure.
Like we need leaders to provide direction and make those tough decisions.
That's a great point. And a certain amount of dependency is totally natural,
Okay.
especially when a group is first forming.
Right.
But when it becomes excessive and it prevents people from taking ownership, that's when it becomes a problem.
So how can you tell if a group is tipping over into that unhealthy dependency?
Well, one red flag is when people constantly defer to the leader for every decision, no matter how small.
Okay.
Another sign is when group members just won't take initiative or express their opinions.
So if you notice your group is always looking to the leader for answers,
Right.
you can try asking questions like, what are your ideas?
Yes.
Or how would you approach this problem?
Exactly. That can help to break the cycle of dependency and encourage people to participate more actively.
Awesome. So we've got these three basic assumptions. Attack flight, driven by fear coupling, fueled by hope in a specific pairing, and dependency, which is characterized by the need for a strong leader.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how these unconscious dynamics can really shape how groups behave.
It's really powerful stuff.
I'm sure our listeners are already starting to see how these patterns might be playing out in their own lives.
I would hope so, but we're going to go even deeper than that.
Oh,
Our source material goes beyond just identifying these basic assumptions.
okay.
It also explores how groups use defense mechanisms to manage the anxiety that arises from these dynamics.
Ooh, that's interesting.
Yeah. We'll save that, though, for the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks. We're just getting started. Welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating and often unconscious world of group dynamics.
Well, we've already uncovered some pretty powerful concepts.
Right.
Like those basic assumptions, attack flight, coupling, and dependency, and how they can really sabotage a group's efforts.
And we explored how any negotiation can be viewed as its own kind of group,
Yeah.
with its own unspoken rules and hidden power struggle.
Right, but knowing about those dynamics is only half the battle.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how do you manage these forces, especially if you're the one trying to guide the group to a successful outcome?
That's the real challenge.
Yeah.
And it brings us to this idea of the symbolic institution.
Okay, symbolic institution sounds a bit academic. Can you break that down for us?
Think of it as the framework that a good facilitator creates
Okay.
to help contain the group's anxieties. It gives them just enough structure so they can get work done even when things are getting really emotional.
So it's, like I said, guidelines and boundaries and processes
Yeah,
that just make everyone feel a little bit safer,
exactly.
even when there are disagreements.
That sense of safety is so crucial for open communication. It really prevents those basic assumptions from just hijacking the whole process.
So what does this symbolic institution look like in real life? What are some tangible things a facilitator would do to create this framework?
Well, one of the most important things is setting up some clear ground rules right from the start, like guidelines for respectful communication and making sure everyone gets a chance to speak.
Exactly. It might seem obvious,
Yeah.
but these ground rules are a constant reminder that everyone's voice matters. They create this sense of shared responsibility for making the group function well.
I bet a lot of people underestimate the power of those seemingly simple ground rules.
They really do.
Yeah, it's like setting the stage for a more productive and civilized conversation.
Exactly.
Okay, so another element of this symbolic institution then is clearly defining everyone's roles.
Yeah, who's facilitating, who's taking notes, who's responsible for what parts of the decision-making.
So it's about making sure everyone understands what's expected of them, both individually
Yeah.
and how they interact with the group.
Yes, that clarity can really help prevent misunderstandings and power struggles,
Okay.
which we know can quickly send a group spiraling into one of those basic assumption patterns.
Right. So we've got the groundwork laid.
With those clear rules and roles. But what about managing the dynamics as they unfold?
Right.
Things don't always go perfectly to plan, even with the best preparation.
Of course not. And that's where a facilitator needs a few more tools.
Okay, like what?
One really powerful technique is called reframing.
Reframing.
Yeah.
I've heard of that in therapy. How does that work in group mediation?
It's about shifting the perspective
Yeah.
on a conflict or an issue. So instead of dwelling on the blame and the negativity,
Right.
you encourage the group to look at things from a different angle to see potential solutions that they might have missed.
So it's kind of like saying, okay, we get it, you're frustrated, but what if we approach this as a challenge to overcome together rather than a battle to be won?
Exactly. By reframing the problem, you can help the group move past those knee-jerk emotional reactions and start thinking more creatively.
Okay, so another technique then.
Another really useful technique is summarizing.
Summarizing. That sounds pretty basic.
It might seem basic, but it's so powerful. For making sure everyone's on the same page,
Okay.
a good facilitator will actively listen to each person
Mm-hmm.
and then reflect back the key points just to confirm that they understand.
That makes sense. It prevents those situations where people are talking past each other or making assumptions about what other people are thinking.
Exactly. It clarifies perspectives and reminds the group of what they have in common.
Right.
And keeps the conversation focused.
It's like taking a messy pile of yarn and weaving it into a tapestry
That's a good one.
where everyone can see the pattern.
I like it.
So speaking of messy, what about those more challenging group members? The ones who dominate the conversation, interrupt constantly, or always seem to be pushing the group toward one of those basic assumptions.
Ah, yes. Those folks can definitely test a facilitator skills.
I bet.
That's where active listening and genuine empathy are really essential.
So even if someone is being disruptive or negative,
Yeah.
you still try to acknowledge their feelings and understand what's driving that behavior.
Exactly. Remember, those basic assumptions are often unconscious.
Right.
So people might not even realize why they're acting that way.
Okay.
And just feeling heard and validated
Yeah.
can de-escalate a situation and open up space for a more productive dialogue.
It's like saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, I understand that you're struggling,
Yeah.
even if you don't agree with their approach.
That's a great way to put it. Validation can be incredibly powerful for shifting a group from defensiveness to collaboration.
Now, let's be realistic. Not every group member is going to be open to that approach.
That's true.
Some people are just determined to be difficult.
Of course, and there will always be people who resist the process or cling to their basic assumption patterns, no matter what you do.
No. So what do you do then?
Well, in those cases, one strategy is to gently redirect the conversation back to those ground rules and goals we talked about earlier.
Reminding them of that shared commitment
Yeah.
to respectful communication and problem solving.
Exactly. Sometimes that simple reminder can ground the group and prevent those disruptive behaviors from derailing everything.
What about humor?
Oh, don't underestimate the power of humor.
A little laughter can go a long way.
It really can. Humor can diffuse tension and create a more lighthearted atmosphere.
Yeah.
But it has to be used carefully,
Okay.
never at someone's expense.
Right.
It's about finding those moments of shared levity that bring the group together.
Okay, so we've got a lot of tools here
We do.
to navigate group dynamics. But what about those times when, despite a facilitator's best efforts,
Yeah.
the group just seems stuck
Okay.
in one of those basic assumptions? What can you do if everyone has fallen into that attack flight mode and they're just spiraling deeper and deeper into fear and blame?
That's when a facilitator's deep understanding of these basic assumptions is so crucial.
Okay.
And it's not about forcing people to change,
Right.
but more about gently nudging the group toward a more productive way of interacting.
So you're using your knowledge of these unconscious patterns to subtly shift the dynamic.
Exactly. And one of the best ways to do that is to just name the pattern.
Okay.
Bring it to the group's conscious awareness.
So instead of getting frustrated and saying, you guys are totally stuck in attack flight mode,
Right.
you might say, hey, I'm noticing we're spending a lot of time focusing on what we're afraid of.
Right.
What if we shifted our energy towards solutions?
That's a great example.
Yeah.
By posing it as a question and inviting the group to explore the dynamic together,
Yeah.
it creates a much less threatening environment for self-reflection.
It's like holding up a mirror to the group, but in a way that feels supportive rather than accusatory.
I like that.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've learned how to establish the symbolic institution.
Mm.
We've learned some techniques like reframing and summarizing, and even tackled how to deal with challenging group members.
It's all about creating a space where people feel safe enough to move beyond those unconscious patterns and engage in more authentic and productive collaboration.
But there's even more to uncover, right? Like, what about those defense mechanisms you mentioned earlier? How do those tie into everything?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us perfectly into the next part of our deep dive.
Ooh, stay tuned because we're about to go even deeper. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring this really interesting world of group dynamics,
It really is fascinating.
especially when it comes to how we reach agreements.
Yeah.
Last time we were talking about those defense mechanisms that groups use to deal with all the anxiety.
Right.
I'm curious, how does that fit into everything?
Well, think about it. Those basic assumptions that we talked about,
Right.
they create a lot of tension in the group.
Okay.
It can be really uncomfortable to face our fears and our dependencies and the fact that there could be conflict.
So naturally, the group is going to try to find ways to protect itself from all that discomfort.
Exactly. The source material talks about these defense mechanisms using terms like illusion, idealization, and belief. It's basically how groups create a story to shield themselves from those uncomfortable truths.
So let me see if I'm getting this right.
Okay.
Like, let's say a group is falling into that dependency pattern where everyone's looking to the leader for all the answers.
Yeah.
They might develop this illusion that the leader is all-knowing and all-powerful, so they don't have to face the reality that they actually need to step up and take more responsibility themselves.
That's a perfect example.
Okay.
Or think about attack flight.
Okay.
A group might idealize their company or their project, believing that it's superior to the competition, so they don't have to acknowledge their weaknesses.
Oh, so they're wearing rose-colored glasses
Exactly.
to avoid seeing all the bad stuff.
And here's the thing. These defense mechanisms can be helpful and hindering.
So it's a necessary evil.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
On the one hand, these shared illusions and beliefs can help the group function by creating this sense of unity and purpose.
Like strength in numbers.
Exactly. But if the group gets too attached to those defenses, it can really block realistic solutions.
It prevents them from actually making progress.
Exactly.
Can you give me a real-world example?
Yeah.
I know the source material talked about that case study about waste management in Montreal.
Yes. This one really brings the concept to life.
Okay.
So it was a public consultation on waste management where citizens could share their ideas and their input.
Okay.
But what happened was the citizens just put all their faith in these commissioners.
Oh, so they fell into that dependency pattern.
Exactly. And they created this illusion that these commissioners were somehow neutral and all-powerful figures who would just solve all the problems.
But that's never really the case, is it?
Right? No one is truly neutral.
Yeah.
And because they were holding on to this illusion, they weren't engaging in any critical dialogue.
Also really talking about the issues.
Right. They weren't pushing back. They weren't demanding accountability. They were just waiting for the commissioners to magically fix everything.
And what were the consequences of that?
Well, as you might imagine, a lot of crucial issues got swept under the rug. Important voices were silenced, and the democratic process was undermined.
So these defense mechanisms might offer temporary comfort,
Yeah,
but they can really do more harm than good.
they can, and it really highlights how important it is to question our assumptions, challenge the narratives, and hold each other accountable even when it's hard.
It's so easy to just go along with a crowd.
You know? It is.
You don't want to rock the boat.
It's much easier to just go with the flow.
But sometimes rocking the boat is exactly what's needed.
Sometimes it is.
So this is all fascinating.
It is.
But I'm not a professional mediator
Right.
or facilitator. So how can all of this actually help me in my everyday life?
Well, think about all the groups you're a part of.
Okay, like my family, my workplace, my community, even online groups.
Exactly. All those groups are going to be affected by those same unconscious dynamics.
So you're saying that attack flight and coupling and dependency and those defense mechanisms can pop up anywhere.
Oh, absolutely. Have you ever been in a family argument that just escalated out of control, where everyone was just ready to pounce on the next perceived slight?
You're hitting a little close to home there, but yeah, I can definitely relate.
That to be attack flight in action, or maybe you've been in a work meeting where everyone just keeps deferring to the boss, even when they have good ideas.
Right.
That could be dependency.
And what about when a group of friends get caught up in their inside jokes and jargon, so it's hard for anyone new to join the conversation? Is that a form of coupling?
It definitely could be.
So even though we might not be in a formal mediation,
Mm-hmm.
we can still use this knowledge
Oh, for sure.
to navigate those everyday group situations.
Absolutely. It's like having X-ray vision for group behavior.
So we can see those patterns and then make better choices about how we participate.
Exactly.
But if we're not a trained facilitator, what can we do about it?
Well, the first step is noticing.
Okay.
Just pay attention to the subtle cues and the emotions and the behaviors that can signal that a particular basic assumption is at play.
So it's about being a more mindful observer.
Exactly. And once you start to recognize those patterns, you can make more conscious choices about how you respond.
So instead of getting swept up in the attack flight frenzy,
Mm.
I can step back and ask myself, what's going on here? What are people afraid of? How can I help create a sense of safety?
That's a great approach. Or if you're in a group that's overly dependent on the leader,
Okay.
you can encourage others to share their ideas
Yeah.
and take more initiative.
I like that.
It's about subtly shifting the dynamic towards more balance and collaboration.
What about when I'm the only one who sees what's going on?
Right.
It's like everyone else is trapped in groupthink and I'm the only voice of reason.
That's a tough spot to be in.
It is.
But even small actions can make a difference.
Okay.
You might not be able to change the whole group dynamic,
Right.
but you can control your own interactions
Yeah.
and model a more constructive approach.
So focus on what I can control.
Exactly. And you might be surprised by the ripple effect. Your willingness to speak up and to ask those tough questions and challenge those patterns can really inspire other people to do the same.
It's about leading by example,
It is.
but it's not just about those basic assumptions, right?
Right, right.
We also have to think about that symbolic institution.
Yes, even in informal settings.
Yeah, like even if I'm not a trained facilitator,
Hmm.
I can still create these mini symbolic institutions.
Exactly. It's about establishing clear boundaries and ground rules for how we interact.
So just saying something like, hey, before we get started, let's make sure everyone has a chance to speak.
Yeah,
Or let's try to really listen to each other without interrupting.
exactly.
Little things like that can make a big difference.
They really can.
So as we wrap up today, I want to emphasize that understanding these group dynamics, it's an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
You don't just wake up one day and suddenly you're a master of group psychology.
It's not a one-time thing.
We're all going to fall back into those old patterns sometimes.
Because we're human, but the more we learn about it, the better we'll get at navigating those situations.
Exactly. So keep learning, keep growing, and keep working on creating more harmonious and productive group experiences.
The next time you're in a group setting, just pay attention, notice those dynamics, and don't be afraid to laugh a little.
That's a wrap on our deep dive into the world of group dynamics.
It's been fun.
We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll keep exploring these concepts in your own life.
Until next time, keep diving deep.